A 5-year-old girl pulls back a worn blanket in her family's barn and discovers 2 crying twin babies dressed in formal suits, as flames begin to consume the old wooden structure around them. What no one else knows is that these infants had been visiting this barn for months, secretly cared for by the girl's mother before her recent death. Now, with smoke filling the air and time running out, this small child must become a hero. But when a powerful CEO receives an urgent call about a fire on a property he's never heard of, he has no idea that racing to that burning barn will reveal a secret that will change his life forever. Before we dive into this powerful story of justice and redemption, type love in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Miller farm, turning the old red barn into a silhouette against the Oklahoma sky. 5-year-old Harper Miller stood at the kitchen window, her blonde pigtails catching the light as she stared at that barn with the intensity only a grieving child could muster. It had been 3 weeks since her mother died. 3 weeks since cancer had stolen away the only person who truly understood Harper's quiet nature, her love of animals, her fear of thunderstorms. 3 weeks since the farmhouse had become a place of whispers and sad looks from relatives who didn't know what to say to a little girl whose world had shattered. Harper's father, William Miller, sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands, surrounded by bills he couldn't pay and condolence cards he couldn't read. The farm was failing. It had been failing even before Sarah's illness, but her medical bills had been the final blow. Now, with his wife gone and his daughter silent with grief, William felt like he was drowning. "Harper, come away from the window," he said gently. "You haven't eaten anything today." But Harper wasn't listening. She was remembering something her mother had said 2 days before she died, when Harper had been allowed to visit the hospital room one last time. "The barn, sweetheart," Sarah had whispered, her voice weak but urgent. "You have to check the barn. Every day. Promise me." Harper had promised, not understanding, not. Her mother's mind had been clouded with medication, and everyone had said she was confused at the end. But Harper remembered the look in her mother's eyes. It hadn't been confusion. It had been desperation. For 3 weeks, Harper had kept that promise. Every day she'd slipped out to the barn while her father was distracted, searching for whatever her mother had wanted her to find. She'd looked in the hay bales, in the old tractor, in the storage bins. Nothing. Today felt different, though. Today, Harper had woken with a strange certainty that she needed to look again, needed to search more carefully. It was the same feeling she'd had the morning her mother died, a knowing in her bones that something important was happening. "I'll be right back, Daddy," Harper said quietly, already moving toward the back door. William looked up, too exhausted to argue. "Don't go far, and stay away from the barn. Some of those boards are rotting." But Harper was already out the door, her small feet carrying her across the dusty yard toward the structure that dominated their property. The barn was old, built by her great-grandfather 60 years ago. It had weathered storms and seasons, had housed horses and cattle, had been the heart of the farm back when the Miller family had been prosperous. Now it was mostly empty, just old hay and broken equipment. Her father kept saying he needed to tear it down, that it was dangerous. But he never had the time or the money. Harper slipped through the partially open barn door, breathing in the familiar scent of old wood and dried grass. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that pierced through gaps in the walls. For a moment she just stood there, remembering how her mother used to bring her here to see the barn cats, how they'd sit on hay bales and her mother would make up stories about the animals. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it. Crying. Not an animal. A baby. Harper's heart began to pound. She moved deeper into the barn, following the sound toward the far corner where old furniture was stored under canvas tarps. The crying grew louder, more insistent. 2 voices, she realized. 2 babies crying. Her small hands pulled at a worn wool blanket that had been draped over something in the corner. The fabric was heavy, but Harper was determined. When she finally pulled it free, she gasped. 2 infant boys, maybe 6 or 7 months old, lay in a makeshift bed of folded blankets. They were dressed identically in tiny suits, complete with brown vests, white shirts, and red bow ties as if someone had dressed them for a special occasion. Their faces were red from crying, their little fists waving in distress. Harper stared in shock. Babies. In her barn. How? Why? Then she noticed other things. Baby bottles, still half full, sitting nearby. A bag of diapers, jars of baby food, a changing pad. Someone had been caring for these babies here in secret. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. Check the barn. Every day. Promise me. Her mother had known. Her mother had been taking care of these babies. But why here? Why in secret? Harper knelt down, reaching out tentatively to touch one of the crying infants. His tiny hand immediately grasped her finger, holding on with surprising strength. The gesture was so trusting, so desperate for comfort that tears sprang to Harper's eyes. It's okay, she whispered, the way her mother used to whisper to her. I found you. You're not alone. But even as she said it, Harper smelled something wrong. Smoke. She looked up and felt her blood turn to ice. In the far corner of the barn, near where her father stored old fertilizer and chemicals, a small flame flickered to life. It must have started from the old electrical wiring her father kept meaning to fix, a spark finally finding fuel in the dry hay. As Harper watched in horror, the flame caught a pile of loose straw. Fire began to spread with terrifying speed, eating through the hay, climbing the wooden posts, filling the barn with smoke. The babies' cries intensified as if they sensed the danger. Harper's mind raced. She was 5 years old and maybe 40 pounds. These babies were heavy and there were two of them. She couldn't carry both. She could barely carry one. But she had to try. Harper grabbed the first baby, the one who had held her finger. He was heavier than she expected, but she managed to lift him, holding him against her chest, the way she'd seen people hold babies. She stumbled toward the barn door, her small legs shaking with effort. The smoke was getting thicker. Harper could barely see. Her eyes burned. The baby in her arms was coughing, crying harder. She made it outside and gently laid the baby on the grass, a safe distance from the barn. Then, without hesitation, she turned back toward the burning structure. Harper, no! Her father's voice, distant, panicked. He'd seen the smoke from the house, but Harper was already running back inside. The second baby was still there, still crying, now surrounded by smoke and growing flames. She couldn't leave him. Her mother had been protecting these babies. Harper had to finish what her mother started. She grabbed the second infant, this one seeming even heavier than the first. The heat was intense now, the smoke choking. Harper couldn't breathe properly. Her vision was getting dark around the edges, but she kept moving, kept holding on to that baby, kept putting one small foot in front of the other. She was almost to the door when a beam cracked above her. Harper looked up and saw it falling, saw her own death coming in slow motion. Then strong arms grabbed her, grabbed the baby, pulled them both outside just as the beam crashed down where they'd been standing. Harper found herself on the ground, coughing violently, her father's terrified face hovering above her. Around them, both babies were screaming. Alive. Safe. William Miller held his daughter, checking her for injuries, his hands shaking. Harper, what were you thinking? You could have died. What? He stopped, finally registering what he was seeing. Where did these babies come from? Harper coughed, trying to catch her breath. Mommy, she managed. Mommy was taking care of them. In the barn. She told me to check. She told me. William stared at his daughter, then at the two infants lying on the grass in their incongruous formal attire, then at his barn as it went up in flames. Nothing made sense. His wife had been caring for babies? In secret? Whose babies? Behind them, the sound of sirens grew closer. Someone must have seen the smoke and called 911. But William barely heard it. He was too busy trying to understand how his quiet, gentle wife had been hiding infant twins on their property, and why those babies were dressed like they were attending a wedding. The Miller farm was controlled chaos for the next hour. Fire trucks arrived, their crews working efficiently to contain the barn fire before it spread to the fields. Paramedics checked Harper and the twins, all three miraculously uninjured beyond some smoke inhalation. Police officers took statements, their expressions growing more puzzled by the minute. Sheriff Tom Bradley had known the Miller family for 30 years. He'd gone to school with William, had attended his wedding to Sarah, had been at her funeral 3 weeks ago. Now he stood in the Miller's kitchen trying to make sense of what he was hearing. "Let me get this straight," Tom said slowly. "Your 5-year-old daughter found 2 unidentified infant boys in your barn, dressed in formal clothes, and your late wife had apparently been caring for them in secret?" William nodded, looking shell-shocked. Harper sat beside him, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm afternoon, her small hand gripping her father's. "And Harper says Sarah told her to check the barn right before she died." "That's what she says." William looked down at his daughter. "Harper, sweetheart, did Mommy ever mention these babies to you before? Did you see her with them?" Harper shook her head. "I saw Mommy go to the barn lots of times. She said she was feeding the barn cats, but sometimes she stayed there a long time." The little girl's voice was quiet but clear. "One time I heard her singing, like when she used to sing to me when I was little." Tom exchanged glances with his deputy. "We need to figure out who these babies belong to. They're clearly well cared for, healthy, dressed in expensive clothes. Someone is missing them. Unless someone didn't want them found," the deputy said quietly. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Tom pulled out his radio. "I'm calling Child Protective Services. Those babies need to be checked out properly, and we need to start working missing persons cases." Within 20 minutes, a social worker arrived. Margaret Hayes was in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She examined the twins with practiced efficiency, while Tom filled her in on the bizarre circumstances. "These are healthy babies," Margaret announced. "Around 7 months old, I'd estimate. Well-fed, clean, no signs of neglect or abuse. Someone has been taking excellent care of them." She held up one of the tiny suits. "This is expensive. Custom-made, I'd guess. And look at this." She showed them the label inside the vest. There's an embroidered monogram. TK. "TK," Tom repeated. "That's something. Can you run that against missing children reports?" "Already on it," his deputy said, phone in hand. Margaret turned to William. "Mr. Miller, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some hard questions. Did you have any idea your wife was caring for these children?" "None, I swear." William's voice cracked. "Sarah was sick for almost a year. Toward the end, she was barely leaving the house. How could she have been going to the barn to care for babies? It doesn't make sense. When did the barn visits start?" William thought hard. "I don't know. Maybe 6, 7 months ago, around the time the babies would have been born." He paled. "You don't think Sarah somehow—" "No," Margaret said firmly. "These babies are clearly not newborns who were secretly born. They were brought here from somewhere else. The question is why and by whom." Harper tugged on Margaret's sleeve. "Can I see them? The babies?" Margaret looked at Tom, who nodded. She led Harper to the living room where the twins had been placed in emergency carriers the paramedics had provided. Both babies were sleeping now, exhausted from their ordeal. Harper knelt beside them, her small face serious. "They look like angels," she whispered. "That's what Mommy called them. I remember now. I heard her on the phone once before she got really sick. She said, 'Don't worry, the angels are safe.' I thought she meant the Christmas angels, the decorations, but she meant them." Margaret's eyes widened. "Harper, this is very important. Do you remember who your mother was talking to on the phone?" Harper scrunched up her face, thinking. "A man. She called him Tyler? Thomas? Something with a T." "TK," Tom said quietly. "The monogram. Thomas K. Tyler K." His deputy burst back into the room, phone in hand and face pale. "Sheriff, you need to hear this. There is a missing children case. Twin boys, 7 months old, reported missing 4 days ago. But here's the thing. They weren't reported missing by their parents. They were reported missing by their father's personal assistant after he couldn't reach him for 48 hours. Where's the father now? That's just it. Nobody knows. The father, Theodore Kingston, is a CEO of Kingston Industries in Chicago. He's a widower, was raising the twins alone. His assistant got worried when he didn't show up for a major board meeting and wasn't answering calls. When she went to his house, it was empty. No Theodore Kingston, no babies, no explanation. Tom felt the pieces starting to come together, though the picture they formed was disturbing. Theodore Kingston. TK. Did the assistant say anything about why he might have vanished? The deputy scrolled through his notes. She mentioned that Kingston had been under extreme stress. His wife died in childbirth with the twins. He inherited her entire estate, but there were family members contesting the will. The assistant said he'd been receiving threats. What kind of threats? She wasn't specific, but she said Kingston had been paranoid for weeks, thought someone was trying to hurt his sons. He'd hired extra security, was barely sleeping. The deputy looked up. Sheriff, what if Kingston brought the babies here to hide them? What if Sarah Miller was helping him? But why would a Chicago CEO know a Oklahoma farm wife? Margaret asked. William had been listening, his face growing more troubled. Sarah grew up in Chicago. Her maiden name was Kingston. She told me once she had a cousin who'd made it big in business, but they'd lost touch. He looked at the sleeping babies. Theodore Kingston. Could he be Sarah's cousin? Everything clicked into place. A desperate father, afraid for his children's lives. A dying cousin offering sanctuary on a remote farm where no one would think to look. Secret meetings in a barn. Babies dressed in good clothes as if their father visited when he could, staying just long enough to hold them before disappearing back to Chicago. But if that was true, where was Theodore Kingston now? And why had he abandoned his children? Tom was reaching for his phone to call Chicago PD when it rang. The number was unfamiliar. Sheriff Bradley, he answered. Is this Tom Bradley of Millerton, Oklahoma? The voice was male, educated, desperate. Yes, who is this? My name is Theodore Kingston. I'm calling about my sons. I saw the news report about the barn fire. Please tell me they're alive. Tom's grip tightened on the phone. Mr. Kingston, where are you? That doesn't matter. Are my boys alive? The news said a child pulled babies from a burning barn. Are they okay? They're safe. Mr. Kingston, you need to come here and explain what's going on. I can't. It's not safe. They're watching. Theodore's voice broke. I need to know they're protected. I need to know they're not in danger. Who's watching? Who's threatening you? My late wife's family. They want the twins dead so they can inherit her fortune. I had proof, recordings, but they found out. They've been hunting me for weeks. I had to hide the boys somewhere they'd never look. Theodore was speaking fast, words tumbling over each other. Sarah was my cousin. She was dying anyway, said she wanted to do something good before she left. She agreed to watch the boys in her barn where no one would think to look. I'd visit at night when it was safe. Mr. Kingston, your cousin died 3 weeks ago. Silence, then a sound like a sob. No, she can't be. She was supposed to have months. I'm sorry, but Mr. Kingston, if what you're saying is true, you need to come in. We can protect you and your sons. You don't understand. These people have resources, connections. They've already tried to kill me twice, that's why I ran. I thought if they couldn't find me or the boys, they'd eventually give up. But I couldn't risk visiting the barn anymore. I was too afraid I'd lead them there. Theodore's breathing was ragged. I've been living in my car, moving every few hours, trying to figure out what to do. When I saw the news about the fire, I thought I'd lost them. I thought my boys were dead. Tom's mind raced. Listen to me carefully. Your sons are safe right now, but if what you're saying is true, they're also in danger as soon as word gets out about who they are. You need to come in, and you need to bring any evidence you have. We'll get the FBI involved if necessary. The FBI? Theodore laughed bitterly. Do you know how much money we're talking about? My wife's family fortune is worth $300 million. With the twins dead, it reverts to her brother. He's already tried to have me declared incompetent, tried to claim I killed his sister, tried everything legal. When that didn't work, he went illegal. Margaret had been listening to the conversation on speaker. She leaned forward. Mr. Kingston, this is Margaret Hayes from Child Protective Services. Your sons cannot remain in unofficial care. Either you come forward, or they'll be placed in state custody. State custody? Theodore's voice rose in panic. No, you don't understand. Her brother has connections everywhere. Judges, lawyers, people in government. If you put them in the system, he'll find them. He'll kill them. Then come forward and fight this legally, Tom said firmly. We can protect you, all of you. There was a long pause. Finally, Theodore spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I'm in Colorado. I can be there in 14 hours, but Sheriff, I'm begging you. Don't let anyone know who those babies are until I get there. Don't put their names in any official report. Please. Tom looked at Margaret, who nodded reluctantly. We'll keep it quiet for now, but Kingston, if you're not here in 14 hours, all bets are off. I'll be there. Just keep my boys safe. And Sheriff, thank the little girl who saved them. She's a hero. The line went dead. Tom looked around the room at William, Harper, Margaret, and his deputy. We have 14 hours before Theodore Kingston arrives. In that time, we need to verify his story, prepare for possible danger, and figure out how to keep 2 infant boys safe from people with 300 million reasons to want them dead. Harper stood up from where she'd been watching the sleeping twins. They'll be safe here, she said with the absolute certainty only a child could possess. Mommy was protecting them. Now we'll protect them. That's what you do for angels. And somehow, looking at this small, brave girl who'd risked her life for babies she didn't even know, Tom believed her. The next 14 hours were the longest of Tom Bradley's career. He'd put the Miller farm on unofficial lockdown, stationing deputies at the property entrance with instructions to turn away everyone except emergency personnel. He'd sworn everyone who knew about the twins to secrecy, though he knew that in a small town like Millerton, secrets had a short half-life. William Miller had transformed his living room into a makeshift nursery. Neighbors, told only that there'd been an emergency, had dropped off cribs, clothes, formula, everything 2 babies might need. Harper had appointed herself as the twins' guardian, refusing to leave their side except when her father insisted she eat or rest. Tom watched the little girl as she sat between the 2 cribs, humming the same song her mother used to sing. There was something both heartbreaking and inspiring about her dedication to these children. She's handling this better than I am, William said quietly, joining Tom by the window. I keep expecting Sarah to walk through that door and explain everything. It feels like she's still here, watching over those babies through Harper. Your daughter is remarkable, Tom observed. She gets that from her mother. William's voice was thick with emotion. Sarah was always bringing home strays. Injured birds, abandoned kittens, once even a fox with a broken leg. She couldn't stand to see anything suffering. He gestured toward the twins. I guess babies were no different. Tom's phone buzzed, his deputy calling. Talk to me. I did some digging into the Kingston family. It's worse than we thought, Sheriff. Theodore's late wife was Veronica Kingston Bradford. She came from old money, the kind that buys influence. Her brother, Julian Bradford, is connected to everyone from judges to congressmen. And get this. There have been 3 accidents in the past 6 months involving people who got in his way. A business rival whose brakes failed. A lawyer who fell downstairs. A journalist who had a sudden heart attack. Can any of it be proven? Not a single thing. The man is careful. But Sheriff, if he finds out those babies are here, we're going to need more than a couple of deputies and good intentions. Tom had been thinking the same thing. Call the FBI. I don't care about jurisdiction or politics. Those babies need federal protection and they need it now. Already done. There's a team en route from the Oklahoma City field office. They'll be here in 2 hours. After ending the call, Tom found Margaret in the kitchen preparing bottles. We have FBI coming. This is officially bigger than us. Margaret nodded. Good, because I've been thinking about what happens when Theodore Kingston gets here. Even if everything he says is true, even if we can prove Julian Bradford is behind threats, those babies can't live on the run. They need stability, a home, a chance at normal life. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that we need to think long-term. If Theodore Kingston is as paranoid and traumatized as he sounds, is he fit to care for 2 infants? And if Julian Bradford is as dangerous as the evidence suggests, can those boys ever be safe with their father? Tom didn't have answers. He was saved from responding by Harper's voice calling out, "Sheriff Tom, they're waking up." In the living room, both twins were indeed stirring, their little faces scrunching up in pre-cry expressions. Harper stood between the cribs, looking uncertain. "What do I do?" Margaret moved in smoothly, checking diapers, preparing bottles. Within minutes, she had both babies changed and feeding. Harper watched with intense concentration, as if memorizing every movement. "Can I help?" the little girl asked. "Of course." Margaret showed her how to hold a bottle, how to support a baby's head. Harper's small face was fierce with concentration as she fed one of the twins, whispering encouragement. "You're okay now. We're going to take care of you." Tom felt his throat tighten. This child had lost her mother, nearly died in a fire, and was now pouring all her grief and love into protecting these infants. If Julian Bradford thought he could harm these babies, he'd have to go through Harper Miller first. And somehow, Tom suspected she'd give him more trouble than Bradford expected. The afternoon wore on. The FBI arrived, 4 agents led by Special Agent Rachel Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who immediately took command of the situation. She interviewed everyone, examined the barn ruins, set up surveillance equipment, and turned the Miller farm into a fortress. "If Bradford's people are watching, they'll see the federal presence," she told Tom. "That might be enough to make them back off. Or it might tell them exactly where the babies are," Tom countered. "Either way, we're ready." Rachel checked her watch. "Theodore Kingston should be here in 3 hours. I've got agents stationed along every route he might take. If anyone's following him, we'll know." But the hours passed with no sign of Theodore Kingston. 3 hours became 4, then 5. Tom tried calling the number Kingston had used earlier. No answer. 6 hours. 7. The sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The burned remnant of the Miller barn stood like a black skeleton against the sunset, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing the twins. At hour 8, Rachel's phone rang. She listened, her expression darkening. "Understood, keep me posted." She looked at Tom. They found Theodore Kingston's car abandoned at a rest stop in Kansas. No sign of him. No blood, no struggle, just an empty car with the keys still in the ignition. "Bradford got to him," Tom said flatly. "We don't know that. He could have run again, could be trying to hide, but..." Rachel trailed off, but everyone understood. Theodore Kingston was either dead or captured. Either way, the twins were now orphans with a $300 million target on their backs. Harper, who'd been sitting with the sleeping babies, looked up. "He's coming," she said with certainty. "He has to come. They're his babies." But midnight came and went with no sign of Theodore Kingston. Tom stood on the Miller porch watching his deputies patrol the property perimeter, watching FBI agents monitor surveillance equipment, and wondered what the hell they were supposed to do now. 2 innocent infants, a traumatized 5-year-old girl, a grieving father, and a threat they couldn't quite prove, but everyone felt hanging in the air like a gathering storm. His phone rang at 2 a.m. Unknown number. Tom almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Sheriff?" The voice was Theodore Kingston's, but weaker now, pain-filled. "Kingston, where are you?" "Doesn't matter, I'm not going to make it. They found me, I got away, but I'm hurt. Bad." Theodore coughed, a wet sound that made Tom's stomach clench. "Listen to me. In my car, under the driver's seat, there's a phone, not the one I've been using. A second phone with recordings, emails, everything that proves Julian tried to have me killed. Get it, use it, protect my sons. We'll send help. Tell me where you are." "Too late. But, Sheriff, there's something else. Sarah, my cousin, she made me promise something before she got too sick to talk. She said if anything happened to me, if I couldn't care for the boys, she wanted them raised on a farm. She wanted them to have the childhood she had. Simple, safe, real." Tom's heart sank. "Theodore. The little girl who saved them. Harper. Sarah told me about her in our last phone call. Said Harper was special. Said she had her mother's heart. Theodore's breathing was labored now. I know what I'm asking is crazy. I know a 5-year-old can't raise babies, but her father, William Miller, he's a good man, right? Sarah said so. And they live on a farm. They could give my boys what I never could, a chance to grow up away from money and murder and all this poison. You're asking me to give your children to a struggling farmer and a little girl? I'm asking you to give them a life, a real life. Julian will never stop hunting them if he knows they're alive. But if Theodore Kingston's sons disappear, if 2 orphans with no connection to the Bradford fortune just fade into the system, Julian has no reason to look for them. Theodore coughed again, worse this time. I have life insurance, $2 million. It's set to go to whoever takes custody of my boys. That would save the Miller farm, wouldn't it? Give them security? Theodore, you need medical attention. What I need is impossible. But my sons, they can still have a future, just not as Kingstons. Change their names. Tell people they're distant relatives of Sarah's who needed adoption after tragedy. Small-town people won't ask too many questions. His voice was fading now. Sheriff, I can feel myself dying. Last request, please. Give my angels the childhood they deserve. Where are you? Tom demanded. Let us help you. But the line was dead. Tom tried calling back, but the number was no longer in service. He stood there in the dark, holding a silent phone, and understood that Theodore Kingston had just died asking a small-town sheriff to falsify records, hide 2 babies, and defraud a justice system that was supposed to protect everyone equally. The right thing would be to report everything, put the twins into official custody, let the courts sort out inheritance and threats and truth. That's what the law required. That's what he'd sworn to uphold. But Tom had been a cop long enough to know that sometimes the law and justice weren't the same thing. He thought about Harper Miller, who'd risked her life for babies she didn't know. He thought about Sarah Miller, who'd spent her last months protecting her cousin's children. He thought about William Miller, who was barely holding on but had still opened his home to 2 infants in crisis. And he thought about Julian Bradford, who had 300 million reasons to ensure 2 innocent babies never reached their first birthday. Tom walked back into the farmhouse where Rachel Morrison was monitoring communications. Agent Morrison, we need to talk about what happens to those babies now. What he was about to propose could end his career. But looking at those sleeping infants, remembering Harper's fierce determination to protect them, thinking about Theodore Kingston dying alone in the dark, Tom realized some things mattered more than careers. Sometimes you had to break the rules to do what was right. Special Agent Rachel Morrison listened to Tom's proposal with an expression that gave nothing away. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. What you're suggesting is illegal on about 12 different levels, she said finally. I know. It would require falsifying documents, lying to federal authorities, and deliberately concealing information relevant to an ongoing investigation. I know that too. Rachel stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark prairie. It would also save 2 innocent children from a man who has probably already killed their father, and will absolutely kill them if given the chance. Tom joined her at the window. Theodore Kingston's last words were a request for his sons to have the life he couldn't give them. A life away from money and threats and fear. Is that really such an impossible dream? In theory, no. In practice? Rachel turned to face him. We'd need to establish a completely false paper trail. Birth certificates, adoption records, family history. We'd need to explain where 2 7-month-old babies suddenly came from. We'd need to hide them in plain sight in a way that Julian Bradford's considerable resources won't uncover. Sarah Miller was adopted, Tom said. I checked the records. That's public knowledge. What if she had other family that came forward? Distant cousins, maybe, who tragically died, leaving their infant twins orphans. And these convenient cousins just happened to appear right when Sarah's barn burned down? Small-town coincidence. Happens all the time. Rachel almost smiled. You've thought this through. I've been thinking about it since Theodore's call. I don't like it. It goes against everything I swore to uphold. But Agent Morrison, I've been a cop for 25 years. I know when someone's guilty and I know when someone's in danger. Those babies are in danger from a man the law can't seem to touch. What I'm proposing isn't justice by the book, but it might be the only justice those kids ever get. Rachel was quiet again, thinking. The second phone Theodore mentioned. If we find it, if it has the proof he claimed, we might be able to take down Julian Bradford legally. Might. And in the meantime? In the meantime, those babies are official wards of the state in protective custody, with their identities known to everyone in the system, including judges and social workers who might have connections to Bradford. Rachel's expression hardened. I've seen what powerful men can do when they want something badly enough. I've seen evidence disappear, witnesses recant, cases fall apart for no good reason. So you'll help? I'll think about it. She checked her watch. It's 3 a.m. We have a few hours before anyone expects a status update. Let's use that time wisely. They spent those hours planning. Margaret Hayes, the social worker, joined them after Tom explained the situation. She didn't like it any more than they did, but she'd been doing her job long enough to recognize when the system was going to fail a child. I can create adoption paperwork, she said reluctantly. It won't be strictly legal, but it will look legal. If we say Sarah Miller had cousins who died in an accident, car crash maybe, and William Miller agreed to take the babies, that's plausible. Happens all the time in rural areas. Family takes care of family. What about the timing? Tom asked. The babies showing up right when the barn burned? That actually works in our favor, Margaret pointed out. The barn fire made news. Someone seeing that news, realizing the Millers had suffered another tragedy, reaching out to ask if they could help by taking the babies. That's human nature. Rachel nodded slowly. We'd need to contact Theodore Kingston's lawyer, get access to that life insurance policy he mentioned. $2 million suddenly appearing would raise questions. What if it appeared gradually? William Miller had been listening from the doorway. They all turned, surprised. Sorry, I couldn't sleep, but I've been thinking. If the life insurance is set up to pay whoever takes custody, and we establish custody quietly, the money could be released to a trust or something, not all at once, over time. Enough to keep the farm running, pay for raising 2 kids, but not so much that it looks suspicious. You're willing to do this? And Tom asked. Take in 2 babies, lie about who they are, live with this secret forever? William looked toward the living room where Harper slept, curled up between the 2 cribs, her small hand reaching through the bars to hold one of the twins' tiny feet. My wife spent her last months protecting those babies. My daughter nearly died saving them. And he paused, emotion thick in his voice. I've been barely holding on since Sarah died. The farm is failing, I can barely take care of Harper. I didn't know how we'd survive. Maybe those babies need us. But Sheriff, I think we need them too. Margaret made notes. We'll need to change their names, the Kingston name is too recognizable. Samuel and Simon, Harper's small voice said. They all turned to see her standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. That's what we should call them. Mommy liked those names. She said if she'd had boys, she would have named them Samuel and Simon. Harper, what are you doing up? William moved to his daughter. I heard you talking. She looked around at the adults with those 2 old eyes that children who've suffered develop. You're trying to protect the angels. That's good. They need protecting. She walked over to Tom. You're going to let Daddy keep them, right? Because they belong here. Mommy brought them here. That means something. Tom knelt down to Harper's level. Harper, if we do this, it has to be a secret. Forever. Samuel and Simon can never know they were someone else. No one can know. Can you keep that secret? Harper's expression was solemn. Mommy kept secrets to protect them. I can too. The little girl's certainty decided it. Rachel Morrison nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right. We do this. But we do it right. No half measures, no mistakes. Those babies become Samuel and Simon Miller, orphaned cousins adopted by William Miller. The Kingston twins disappear into the ether, and we all take this secret to our graves. She looked at each of them in turn. Understand what you're agreeing to? If this is ever discovered, we all go down. Prison time, loss of careers, criminal charges. Is protecting 2 babies worth that risk? Yes, William said immediately. Absolutely, Margaret agreed. Tom took longer to answer, thinking about his oath, his duty, his 25 years of service. Then he thought about Theodore Kingston dying alone, and Harper Miller pulling babies from flames, and Sarah Miller spending her last months doing one final good thing. "Yes," he said, "it's worth it." Harper just nodded, as if there had never been any question. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Rachel sent her FBI team away, telling them the babies had been transferred to a secure facility in Oklahoma City. She'd deal with the paperwork later, she said. Margaret created a file of adoption documents that would pass casual inspection. Tom contacted Theodore Kingston's lawyer, a man who listened to the carefully worded explanation and said, "I'll make sure the life insurance processes correctly." Theodore would have wanted those boys taken care of no matter what it took. By sunrise, Samuel and Simon Miller officially existed. Two baby boys, 7 months old, orphaned when their parents died in a car accident in Texas, taken in by their mother's cousin William Miller. The story was simple, plausible, and almost impossible to disprove without extensive investigation that no one had reason to conduct. The Kingston twins, meanwhile, were listed as missing, presumed endangered. The FBI would continue investigating Julian Bradford, looking for Theodore Kingston's body, pursuing the truth. But officially, the two cases were unrelated. Julian Bradford, reading news reports about his missing nephews, would find nothing to connect them to a barn fire in rural Oklahoma. The children he wanted dead had simply vanished. As the sun rose over the Miller farm, painting the burned barn and prairie in shades of gold, Harper sat on the porch steps holding Simon while William fed Samuel. The babies were content, their earlier trauma forgotten in the resilience of infancy. Tom sat beside Harper, exhausted and troubled, but also strangely at peace. "Your mama would be proud of you," he told the little girl. Harper leaned against his shoulder. "She's still here, I can feel her, she's making sure the angels are safe." And watching this small makeshift family beginning to form from grief and courage and desperate hope, Tom thought maybe she was right. Maybe Sarah Miller's love was still protecting these babies, working through her daughter, her husband, even through a small-town sheriff who'd just committed career suicide to do the right thing. In Chicago, Julian Bradford was making phone calls demanding updates, growing increasingly frustrated that his nephews had seemingly disappeared. He'd increased the reward for information, had private investigators scouring the country, had connections in law enforcement looking for any sign of the Kingston twins. He would never find them, because Theodore Kingston's sons were gone, replaced by two farm boys named Samuel and Simon who would grow up feeding chickens and baling hay, who would know nothing of boardrooms or billions, who would have exactly the simple, safe childhood their father had died to give them. It wasn't justice by any legal definition, but it was the justice those babies deserved. 3 months later, the Miller farm had transformed. The life insurance money, carefully distributed through a trust, had paid off the mortgage, repaired equipment, and even allowed William to hire help. The burned barn had been demolished, replaced by a smaller but sturdy new structure. And the farmhouse, once echoing with grief, now rang with the sounds of 2 7-month-old boys learning to laugh. Harper had thrown herself into being a big sister, with the same fierce devotion she'd shown when pulling the twins from fire. She'd learned to change diapers, warm bottles, and sing lullabies. When Samuel cried in the night, it was often Harper who stumbled to his crib before William could wake. When Simon knocked over his bowl of mashed peas, it was Harper who cleaned it up, giggling at the mess. "She's growing up too fast," William told Margaret during one of her regular check-in visits. The visits were officially to monitor the adoption, but really they were to make sure everyone was adjusting and, more importantly, that their secret remained safe. "She's healing," Margaret corrected gently. "Children process grief differently than adults. Sometimes taking care of someone else helps them work through their own pain." It was true. Harper rarely cried about her mother anymore. Instead, she talked to the twins about her. "Your mama Sarah loved you," she'd tell them, though they were too young to understand. "She was sick, but she still took care of you. And now I'm going to take care of you, just like she would want." Tom Bradley stopped by regularly, always with a plausible excuse, checking on the fire investigation, following up on paperwork, just being neighborly. Really, he was making sure no one had come asking questions. So far, their secret held. The FBI investigation into Theodore Kingston's disappearance had stalled. His body was never found, though Rachel Morrison privately told Tom they'd discovered evidence suggesting he died of internal injuries in an abandoned warehouse in Kansas. Julian Bradford had alibis for his whereabouts, of course. He always did. The search for the Kingston twins had gone cold. Julian Bradford had offered $1 million reward for information leading to their recovery, but no one claimed it. How could they? The Kingston twins no longer existed, but Rachel had found Theodore's second phone, exactly where he'd said it would be. The recordings and emails on it were damning. Theodore had documented months of threats, several attempted murders, and Julian Bradford's explicit instructions to make sure those babies never see their first birthday. "It's enough to arrest him," Rachel told Tom during a quiet meeting at a diner 2 towns over. "But it's not enough to convict. Theodore's dead, can't testify. The recordings could be argued as fabricated. Bradford's lawyers would tie this up for years, and even if we got a conviction, he'd appeal until he died of old age." "So he gets away with it," Tom said bitterly. "For now. But I've opened a much wider investigation into his business practices. We're finding all sorts of interesting things. Tax fraud, bribery, embezzlement. It'll take time, but we'll get him." Rachel smiled grimly. "It might not be for murder, but Julian Bradford will go to prison. I'll make sure of it. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something." Life settled into a rhythm. William discovered that caring for 2 infants while exhausting gave structure to his days. He couldn't spend hours lost in grief when babies needed feeding and changing and attention. The farm work, no longer crushing under the weight of debt, became manageable again. Harper started kindergarten, proudly telling her new teacher about her baby brothers. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, smiled and said what a blessing it must be for the family to have new life after such tragedy. If she thought it was odd that the orphaned cousins bore such a striking resemblance to William and Sarah Miller, she never said so. The town of Millerton, having heard the official story, accepted it without question. Rural communities understood family taking care of family. They understood that sometimes tragedy struck multiple times, and you just did what you had to do. Neighbors brought casseroles and hand-me-down baby clothes. The local church organized a fundraiser to help with adoption costs. It was exactly the kind of community that would protect its own without even realizing that's what they were doing. By Samuel and Simon's first birthday, you'd never know they hadn't been Miller boys from birth. They were walking now, getting into everything with the determined curiosity of toddlers. Samuel was quieter, more observant, content to sit and watch the world. Simon was louder, more adventurous, the first to try climbing furniture or chasing the farm cats. Harper treated them like the miracles they were. "My angels," she still called them, though now with the bossy affection of a big sister rather than the desperate protectiveness of a rescuer. William had started dating again, cautiously, a widow from the next town over who had 2 teenagers and understood grief. She'd met the twins and Harper, had been wonderful with all of them, and William thought maybe eventually his heart might heal enough to love again. Sarah would want that, he knew. She'd always wanted him to be happy. On the anniversary of the barn fire, the Miller family held a small private ceremony. They stood where the old barn had been, where Harper had pulled 2 crying babies from flames, where Sarah's secret had been revealed. "We remember Mama today," William said, holding Simon while Harper held Samuel. "She did something brave and good. She helped babies who needed her. That's who she was. That's who she'll always be." Harper laid flowers on the spot. "Thank you, Mama," she whispered. "The angels are safe. We keep them safe every day, just like you wanted." The twins, too young to understand, played with the flowers and babbled nonsense. But Simon looked up at the sky with his brown eyes, Theodore Kingston's eyes, though no one would ever say so, and smiled. Life went on. The seasons changed. The farm prospered. 2 little boys grew, never knowing they were supposed to be heirs to a fortune, never knowing someone had once wanted them dead, never knowing their father had sacrificed everything to give them this ordinary, precious life. In Chicago, Julian Bradford faced federal charges for financial crimes. The case would take years to prosecute, but the evidence was overwhelming. His reputation was destroyed, his business empire crumbling. He'd escaped murder charges, but he wouldn't escape justice entirely. Sometimes, late at night, Tom Bradley would wake up thinking about what they'd done. The laws they'd broken, the system they'd circumvented, the massive fraud they'd perpetrated. Then he'd drive past the Miller farm and see lights on in the kitchen, see William feeding babies at 2 a.m. I see Harper's artwork on the refrigerator, see a family not just surviving but thriving. And he'd remember Theodore Kingston's last words, "Give my angels the childhood they deserve." They had. Against all odds, against all rules, they'd given 2 babies a chance at normal life. It wasn't legal, it wasn't even entirely ethical, but it was right. Tom knew it in his bones the same way he'd known Harper was telling the truth when she said her mother had been protecting angels. Years would pass. Samuel and Simon would grow up as farm boys, learning to drive tractors and care for animals, doing chores and homework, playing baseball and getting in trouble the way all kids do. They'd call William Dad and talk about their mama Sarah who'd died when they were babies. They'd adore their big sister Harper, who'd been like a second mother to them. And somewhere, Tom believed, Sarah Miller and Theodore Kingston watched over them. 2 people who died to protect these children. 2 people whose love had transcended death and law and logic to make sure Samuel and Simon had what every child deserved: safety, family, and home. The angels were safe. That's what mattered. That's what would always matter. 5 years after the barn fire, Harper Miller stood at the bus stop waiting for her brothers to come home from kindergarten. At 10 years old, she'd grown into a serious, thoughtful girl with her mother's gentle nature and her father's quiet strength. She still remembered everything: the flames, the fear, the desperate weight of babies in her arms, but the memories had softened into something almost dreamlike. The school bus arrived, and 2 identical 5-year-old boys tumbled out, backpacks bouncing, shouting over each other to tell Harper about their day. "We learned about firefighters," Samuel said, his brown eyes bright with excitement. "And the teacher said our sister is a hero because she saved us from a fire," Simon added, tugging on Harper's hand. Harper smiled, leading her brothers toward home. "That was a long time ago." "But you did save us, right?" Samuel asked, serious now. "Dad said you pulled us out of the barn." "I helped," Harper said carefully. This was part of the story they told, the official version that everyone in Millerton knew. 2 babies, abandoned in a barn fire, rescued by a brave 5-year-old girl, adopted by her father. Simple, heroic, true enough. What they didn't tell the twins was everything else: the threats, the murder attempts, the billions of dollars they'd never inherit, the father who died making sure they'd survive. Some secrets, Harper had learned, were kept not because they were shameful, but because they were sacred. At the farm, William was working on the new barn with help from his wife of 2 years, Catherine. She'd fit into their family seamlessly, bringing her teenage children who adored the twins and treated Harper like a younger sister. The blended family shouldn't have worked: 2 kids from one marriage, 2 adopted twins, 2 teenagers from another relationship, but somehow it did. "How was school?" Catherine called as the kids ran up. "Good. We learned about heroes," the twins chorused. That evening, the whole family gathered for dinner, a chaotic affair with 7 people around the table. Samuel spilled his milk. Simon told a rambling story about a frog he'd seen at recess. The teenagers argued about whose turn it was to do dishes, and William and Catherine tried to maintain some semblance of order. It was beautifully, perfectly ordinary. After dinner, Harper found her father alone on the porch, looking out over the fields as the sun set. She sat beside him, comfortable in the silence they'd always shared. "You okay, Dad?" "Just thinking about your mom. She'd love this. All the chaos, all the noise. She always wanted a big family." Harper leaned against his shoulder. "She got one. Just not the way she planned." "No, but maybe better." William put his arm around his daughter. "Harper, there's something I need to tell you. Something about the twins." Harper's heart skipped. They'd never talked directly about the truth, though she knew William knew that she knew. Okay. Their biological father, Theodore Kingston, left instructions with his lawyer. When the twins turn 18, they'll receive a letter explaining everything. Who they really are, what happened, why we did what we did. They'll also receive their inheritance. The lawyer's been managing it all these years. It's substantial. They'll hate us, Harper whispered, for lying. Maybe. Or maybe they'll understand that sometimes love means making impossible choices. Their father chose their safety over their fortune. We chose their happiness over following rules. William squeezed her shoulder. But you deserve to know. You were part of this from the beginning. You saved them. You have a right to know what comes next. What if they choose to go public? What if they want to claim the Kingston name? Then that's their choice. They'll be adults. But Harper, I think by the time they're 18, having grown up here, having had this life, they'll understand why we did it. Harper watched her brothers through the window, playing some elaborate game with Catherine's kids that involved a lot of running and laughing. They were happy. They were safe. They were home. I'd do it all again, she said quietly. Every part. Even the scary parts. Me too. Inside the house, Samuel and Simon were oblivious to the conversation about their future. They were just two kindergartners excited about their upcoming 6th birthday party, about learning to ride bikes without training wheels, about convincing Dad to let them get a dog. They'd grow up with questions, of course. Why did they have brown eyes when everyone else in the family had blue? Why were there no baby pictures of them? Why did strangers sometimes look at them oddly, as if trying to remember where they'd seen those faces before? But those questions would be answered with partial truths that satisfied childhood curiosity. And by the time they were old enough to dig deeper, the twins would be so firmly established as Miller boys that their biological origins would seem almost irrelevant. Sheriff Tom Bradley, now retired, still stopped by occasionally. He'd watch the twins play and think about the massive fraud he'd helped perpetrate. Sometimes his conscience troubled him. He'd broken laws he'd spent his career upholding. He'd subverted justice and hidden the truth. Then he'd see Samuel teaching his younger cousin how to throw a baseball, or Simon helping Harper bake cookies, or both boys running through sprinklers in the summer sun, and his conscience would quiet. They'd saved 2 lives. Not just from immediate danger, but from a lifetime of fear and manipulation and violence. The FBI had finally secured convictions against Julian Bradford. Not for murder, they could never prove his connection to Theodore Kingston's death, but for financial crimes that would keep him in prison for 20 years. The Bradford fortune had been seized, distributed among creditors and victims. The $300 million that should have gone to the twins was gone, absorbed into legal fees and restitution. Even if the twins' true identity were revealed now, there was nothing left to inherit. No reason for them to be in danger, no fortune to fight over. Rachel Morrison, still with the FBI, had orchestrated that outcome deliberately. She'd made sure Julian Bradford's trial revealed enough corruption to trigger asset seizures, had guided prosecutors to freeze the Bradford accounts, had ensured that even if the truth about the Kingston twins eventually came out, they'd be safe because there'd be nothing left to threaten them over. Sometimes, she told Tom during his retirement party, justice takes the long way around, but it gets there eventually. The years continued to pass. The twins grew from kindergartners to elementary students to middle schoolers. Harper graduated high school, went to college studying early childhood education, inspired by her own experiences. She wanted to help kids who'd been through trauma, wanted to give them the same kind of fierce protection she'd given her brothers. Samuel developed a love of mathematics and science, spending hours taking apart machines to understand how they worked. Simon was more artistic, always drawing or building things, his creativity endless. They were different in many ways, but identical in their loyalty to each other and their family. They never questioned why Dad sometimes got sad in September, around the anniversary of a barn fire that had happened before their conscious memories. They never wondered why Harper sometimes called them her angels. They never thought it was strange that Sheriff Bradley sent them birthday cards every year, despite having no biological connection to the family. These were just the quirks of the people who loved them. On their 18th birthday, the twins received 2 letters, one from their father William expressing his love and pride, the other from a lawyer in Chicago they'd never heard of. The second letter, thick and official, began, "My name is Peter Walsh. I was Theodore Kingston's attorney. If you're reading this, you're old enough to know the truth about who you are and where you came from." Samuel and Simon read the letter together in stunned silence. It explained everything. Their biological father, Theodore Kingston. Their mother who'd died giving birth to them. The threats, the danger. The desperate decision to hide them on a farm in Oklahoma. The barn fire that had revealed their presence. The massive conspiracy to fake their identities and give them new lives. It explained about the money that should have been theirs but was gone now, absorbed into legal proceedings. It explained about Julian Bradford, currently serving 20 years in federal prison. It explained about Sheriff Bradley, Margaret Hayes, FBI agent Morrison, all the people who'd risked everything to protect two babies they barely knew. And it explained about Harper, 5 years old, pulling them from flames because that's what her mother had taught her. You save those who need saving. "This is insane," Simon breathed, reading the letter for the third time. "We're not really Millers. We're Kingstons. We had a different father who died to protect us. We were supposed to be billionaires." Samuel was quieter, thinking. Dad knew. Harper knew. They've been lying to us our whole lives. "They've been protecting us," Simon corrected, though his voice was uncertain. The twins found William in the barn, the new barn, built where their mother Sarah had once hidden them from assassins they were too young to remember. He looked up as they entered, and from their expressions, he knew immediately. "You got the letters." "You're not our real father," Samuel said, and the words hit William like a physical blow. "No, biologically I'm not. Theodore Kingston was your biological father. But I've been your dad since you were 7 months old. I've changed your diapers, taught you to ride bikes, helped with homework, worried about you every single day. If that doesn't make me your real father, I don't know what does. You lied to us." Simon's voice cracked. "Everyone lied to us. We protected you. There's a difference." Harper appeared in the barn doorway, drawn by the raised voices. She was home from college for the summer. She saw her brothers' faces and knew. "You know." "Did you know?" Samuel demanded. "This whole time, did you know we were someone else?" Harper met his eyes steadily. "Yes. And you never told us. I kept you safe, that was more important." "We could have been billionaires," Simon shouted. "We could have had everything." "You could have been dead," Harper shot back. "Julian Bradford wanted you murdered. Your biological father died making sure you'd survive. We all risked everything. Our careers, our freedom, our lives to give you what your dad wanted you to have. A normal childhood, a safe life, a family." The twins stared at her, processing this. "So what now?" Samuel asked quietly. "Do we go public? Reclaim the Kingston name? Sue for the inheritance?" "There's no inheritance left," William said. "Bradford's trials consumed it all. And if you go public, you'll spend the rest of your lives as the Kingston twins, defined by your biological parents and your lost fortune. Is that what you want?" Simon looked at his brother. Samuel looked back. They'd had 18 years as Miller boys. 18 years of farm life and family dinners and school plays and little league games. 18 years of being loved and protected and safe. "I don't know," Samuel admitted. The family spent hours talking that night. William and Harper explained everything. The barn fire, Theodore Kingston's desperate phone call, the decision to falsify records, the years of living with the secret. Catherine, who'd known the truth before she married William, offered her perspective as someone who'd come into the situation later. "Whatever you decide, we love you," she said. "You'll always be part of this family. But you're adults now. The choice is yours." The twins took weeks to decide. They researched Theodore Kingston, learning about the man who'd fathered them. They read news articles about Julian Bradford's crimes. They looked at photos of the mother they'd never known, Veronica Kingston Bradford. They also spent time with the people who'd saved them. Tom Bradley, now elderly but still sharp, told them about the night their father had called, dying, begging for his sons to have the life he couldn't give them. Margaret Hayes explained the adoption paperwork, the careful construction of their new identities. Rachel Morrison described the FBI investigation that had eventually brought down Julian Bradford. And Harper told them about pulling them from flames, about being 5 years old and terrified but determined to save the babies her mother had died protecting. In the end, the decision wasn't difficult. Samuel and Simon Miller, they kept the names, held a press conference at the farm. With their family around them, they confirmed the rumors that had been circulating since Peter Walsh's letter had inevitably leaked. Yes, they were the missing Kingston twins. Yes, they'd been hidden and given new identities to protect them from Julian Bradford. Yes, it had been illegal. But it was also right, Samuel said to the cameras. Our biological father made an impossible choice out of love. Our adoptive father, William Miller, honored that choice. Sheriff Bradley, Agent Morrison, Margaret Hayes, and our sister Harper all risked everything to keep us safe. We are Samuel and Simon Miller, Simon added. We grew up on a farm in Oklahoma with a family who loved us. We are not the Kingston twins. Those babies died in a barn fire 18 years ago. What rose from those ashes were two boys who got to have exactly the childhood they deserved. The legal fallout was complicated. There were investigations, hearings, potential charges. But public opinion was overwhelmingly on the Millers' side. The story of a 5-year-old girl saving babies from fire, of a dying father's last request, of a small-town community protecting its own. It resonated. In the end, no charges were filed. The statute of limitations had passed on most of the fraud, and prosecutors were reluctant to charge people for actions that had undeniably saved 2 lives. Tom Bradley, Rachel Morrison, and Margaret Hayes all received official reprimands. None of them cared. They'd do it all again. Life slowly returned to normal. The media attention faded. Samuel and Simon went to college. Samuel studying engineering, Simon studying art. They came home for holidays and summers, helping with the farm, being big brothers to Catherine's younger kids, treating William and Catherine like the parents they were. Harper became a child advocate working with foster children and trauma survivors. She never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, to be scared, to have to be brave when you were too small to fight. On the 20th anniversary of the barn fire, the whole family gathered at the farm. Samuel and Simon, now 25 and successful in their careers, stood with their parents, their sister, and the extended family that had grown over the years. They'd commissioned a memorial stone, placed where the old barn had stood. It read, "In memory of Sarah Miller and Theodore Kingston, who loved fiercely and sacrificed everything for the children in their care, and in honor of Harper Miller, who showed us that even the smallest person can be a hero. The angels are safe." Harper, now 30, stood with her brothers looking at the stone. "Mama would be proud," she said quietly. "Both mamas," Samuel corrected, thinking of the biological mother he'd never known. "And both dads," Simon added, squeezing William's shoulder. They stood together as the sun set over the Oklahoma prairie, as it had set 20 years ago when Harper had pulled 2 crying babies from flames. They were a family built not on biology or law, but on love and sacrifice and the fierce determination of a 5-year-old girl who'd refused to let the angels die. It wasn't the family anyone had planned, but it was the family they'd chosen, and that made all the difference. The end.